Many a slasher villain was created in the 80s, spawning multiple sequels, and one who has managed to sustain a significant fanbase in changing times is the killer doll Chucky. It's a pretty absurd idea, and yet it makes sense why he continues to resonate and leave an impact whenever he makes a new appearance. He has changed and evolved in many ways, and impressively for the most part, the same creators have been with Chucky since the beginning. The character was created by Don Mancini, who was fascinated by the incredible popularity of the Cabbage Patch Kids. His screenplay Child's Play eventually got the attention of producer David Kirshner, and they took the project to MGM UA. Mancini's concept for Child's Play was that it would be a mystery, making the audience unsure if Chucky, or his owner Andy, was the murderer. That element remained intact in the finished film, as we watch Andy's mother and a detective attempt to figure out what's going on. Even the marketing reflected this, as Chucky is kept hidden on the poster. Of course, since Chucky is now one of the most recognizable horror villains, and there have been several sequels since then, there's no surprise anymore. However, that does not lessen the impact of Child's Play and Tom Holland's clever direction. I think very highly of the film, for a number of reasons. First, the central characters are actually ones we care about. My favorite slasher films, including Child's Play, are ones where I'm interested in the leads and want them to survive the monsters and villains chasing them. Andy, his mother Karen, and Detective Mike Norris are well-rounded characters with proper arcs and interesting personalities, and the movie does a good job of showing their confusion at this whole ordeal. Holland is also able to build the proper suspense during certain scenes, so when kills do happen, like the very first one with Karen's coworker, it's a shock. Then there's Chucky himself. Chucky is the result of a serial killer named Charles Lee Ray who transfers his body into a good guy doll, setting the plot in motion. The casting of Brad Dourif was an excellent choice, and he manages to bring the right manic energy to Chucky. While Kirshner designed the character, effects man Kevin Yeager was responsible for making Chucky appear on screen, and did a marvelous job. The puppetry and animatronics that bring Chucky to life are sensational, and still hold up amazingly well today. There are also scenes where Chucky is portrayed by actor Ed Gale for the parts where we see him walking. Child's Play is a film where a strong idea was executed well, with all the pieces coming together to create something special. Impressively, for a slasher film at the time, Child's Play got decent reviews from critics, and pulled in okay numbers at the box office. There was certainly demand for a sequel, and yet MGM opted out of making more films. Why? Well, the studio ended up with new owners who had no interest in making horror films. The rest of Hollywood then came calling, including Disney. That's right, Disney almost got its hands on Chucky. Steven Spielberg, who had previously collaborated with Kirshner on An American Tail, nudged the producers to take Universal's offer first, and thus Chucky found a new home. So if you wondered how he ended up making a cameo in Ready Player One several years later, it's thanks to Spielberg's help in making sure the series continued. In Child's Play 2, the company behind the Good Guy dolls decides to rebuild the original doll with Charles Lee Ray's soul still inside. Why do corporations in horror films always make the most moronic decisions? Anyway, Mancini did not just want to repeat the first movie again, so Karen is absent and Andy is sent to a foster home. The change in location and circumstances did lead to the sequel feeling fresh, and director John Lafia crafted some tense scenes. One notable addition in Child's Play 2 is the teenage Kyle, who ends up helping Andy in defeating Chucky. The movie showed Chucky was a character who could sustain himself for multiple films, and Mancini got right to work on Child's Play 3. Again, he wanted to try something different than what had come before, so Andy was made a teenager, is sent to a military school, and disappointingly, Kyle is nowhere to be seen. Chucky continues to search for Andy to transfer himself back to a human body. While not a bad sequel, Child's Play 3 does lack some of the creativity and tension that categorized the previous two entries, and I'm not sure the military school setting entirely worked. Mancini himself has admitted he wasn't given enough time to flesh out the script to his liking and took a break from the series. Following the success of Scream, slasher films became popular again, with many of them taking on a more meta approach. With the fourth film, Bride of Chucky, Mancini also decided to put a more comedic and self-referential spin on the franchise. He also sought to get away from Andy for a while, which was a smart decision. Instead, Chucky is paired up with a new female companion, Tiffany, played by Jennifer Tilly. After she is transferred into a doll too, they go on the road, and unsurprisingly, mayhem happens in their wake. Tilly knows exactly the right tone to play Tiffany, and makes for an excellent new character for Chucky to interact with. Bride of Chucky was exactly the spark the series needed, and helped make the knife-wielding doll a pop culture icon again. 6 years later, Don Mancini stepped into the director's chair with Seed of Chucky. While Bride of Chucky dipped its toes into the meta pool, this movie dived completely in by setting it in Hollywood and featuring Jennifer Tilly, playing an exaggerated version of herself, filming a Chucky movie. This entry also introduced the offspring of Chucky and Tiffany, which allowed Mancini to explore LGBTQ themes as we see their child deal with gender identity. So Seed of Chucky was ahead of its time in many respects, and it's apparently developed a following within the LGBTQ community. Glenn and Glenda aside, Seed of Chucky continued to rely heavily on the comical banter between Chucky and Tiffany and a large amount of gruesome deaths. The Hollywood satire element is not too terribly clever in my opinion, and the jokes do get old after a while, showing maybe Chucky had run his course. The film's underwhelming box office unsurprisingly put the Child's Play series on hiatus for a while. In 2013, Chucky made his eventual return in the direct-to-video sequel, Curse of Chucky. With Mancini continuing as director, he attempted to bring the series back to its original roots, with less emphasis on comedy. This new film progressed Chucky's story in a few ways, first by expanding on Charles Lee Ray's life before becoming the doll. It also introduced a new major character, with Nika, played by Fiona Dourif. Yes, Brad Dourif's daughter. She ultimately becomes a worthy foe as she attempts to stop Chucky. While I thought the family elements in this sequel were a little too soap opera-ish for my taste, Curse did continue to show Chucky's cleverness in how he attempts to fulfill his evil deeds. 4 years later, Cult of Chucky arrived, which centered on the idea of multiple Chuckys running around. This was a concept Mancini originally wanted to try in Child's Play 3, but the filmmakers were not given a big enough budget to pull it off. Using a mental institution as its primary setting, and also having Andy extract his longtime revenge on Chucky, allowed for a number of creative sequences. Where the plot goes is wild and admittedly unexpected, and shows Mancini is not afraid of trying all sorts of things. I think part of the reason Child's Play is a series that still finds a loyal following is because it frequently changes things up. While not always successful, I find that very admirable. The ending of Cult of Chucky left many things open for the future of Child's Play, which Mancini will continue to explore in a television series set to debut on the Sci-Fi Network next year. However, there is now another Chucky out there. This summer saw the release of a remake to the original Child's Play, produced by MGM and Orion Pictures. How can there be two different Chuckys running around? Well, what I've gathered is that MGM gave Universal and David Kirshner the rights to make sequels, but something they never ironed out were character rights. So MGM retained the ability to remake Child's Play, with new versions of Chucky, Andy, Karen, and Detective Norris. Nonetheless, the filmmakers decided to go in a different direction, removing the voodoo aspect of Chucky's origin story, and instead portraying him as a malfunctioning AI who eventually turns murderous. This is also reflected in Mark Hamill's vocal performance, as rather than copying Dourif, he chose to depict Chucky as more childlike. I thought this was a clever way of allowing this version of Child's Play to be its own thing, and I have to admit, I misjudged the Chucky fanbase. When I saw the remake, I thought the fans would hate this change. I was wrong. Instead, the remake was well received by fans for not just copying the ideas and themes Don Mancini and Tom Holland explored in the original film, allowing it to stand apart and exist in its own alternate universe. I wish more fan bases were that reasonable. In conclusion, it's remarkable how Chucky is still around, making new movies, and looking at new ways to entertain, delight, and scare the audience. I think he has rightfully earned his place as one of the best slasher villains in horror film history. See you next time.